I'd like to call to order the April MTA board meeting held jointly with the Metro North Railroad and Long Island Committee, New York City Transit Committee, Bridges and Tunnels Committee, Finance Committee, Construction Project Oversight Committee, and Safety Committee. We're conducting today's meeting remotely via WebEx and conference call. Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 202.1 suspends the open meetings law requirements, and accordingly, any provisions in the MTA bylaws requiring and regarding public attendance at meetings and board members participating and voting by phone are also suspended. I'd like to ask Monica Murray to do the official roll call for the record. Monica.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, I will now do the official roll call in alphabetical order. When I call your name, please verbally indicate your presence. Andrew Albert. Norman Brown. Randy Glucksman.
Here.
Rhonda Herman.
Here.
David Jones.
Here.
Linda Lacewell.
Here.
Kevin Law.
Okay, Kevin is going to join at 10:30.
Bob Lynn. David Mack.
Here.
Susan Metzger.
Here.
Hayda Mahaltsis.
Here.
Robert Mujica. John Samuelson.
Here.
Larry Schwartz.
Here.
Vinnie Tessatori.
Here.
Neil Zuckerman.
Here.
Let me just try. Andrew Albert.
Yes, here.
Norman Brown. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
What about Commissioner Lynn?
Is he on?
Here, Monica.
Oh, hi, Bob Lynn, and obviously Pat Foy, you're here. Thank you.
All right, so Commissioner Lynn has joined us. Is that right? He's on the phone. Okay. Later in the meeting, agency presidents and staff will submit procurements and actions for consideration and a vote by the board. Your presence at the meeting and silence at the time of a vote will be considered an affirmative vote for the record. If you would like to vote no or abstain, please state your name and your vote, and Monica will record it. We'll now move into our virtual public comment period. Speakers were able to register on Monday and send in their video or voice comments. I note that this approach goes above and beyond what's required for public comment in the suspended open meetings law.
Good morning. We have 31 members of the public registered to speak today. The first 30 minutes of public comment will be delivered at the board meeting, and the remainder will be posted online for the public and board members on April 22nd. I would like to remind our public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience and understanding throughout the virtual public comment session. The next speaker is Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins.
The coronavirus pandemic has created one of the most difficult and darkest times in the history of our great city, state, and country. And yet, even during these times, there are people who work to sustain hope, create access, and provide relief to those who need them on the job. That certainly describes our dedicated MTA employees who ensure that our mass transit system keeps running despite this pandemic. They are getting our healthcare workers, first responders, and other essential workers to and from front lines and back home safely. And sadly, while performing this essential service for New Yorkers, over 50 transit workers have lost their lives from COVID-19. To the families, friends, co-workers, loved ones of all these incredible people, I offer my deepest condolences. Even today, we can't forget that there are 2,000 other MTA employees who have tested positive for the coronavirus, and still more in quarantine. That's why every MTA employee must have the protective gear they need to stay safe during this crisis. While these essential workers are on the job for us, we all have a responsibility to fight against this virus. And that's why I urge everyone using mass transit to practice social distancing. And of course, please, if you don't need to travel, stay home. It's absolutely essential. It will save the lives of New Yorkers and, of course, our MTA workers. Thank you again.
The next speaker is Speaker Carl Heastie.
Hi, I'm Carl Heastie, Speaker of the New York State Assembly. Thank you to all the MTA workers on the front lines who are continuing to keep our system moving in these difficult times. You put yourselves at risk day after day for the benefit of our communities. There are so many essential workers that rely on public transportation to get to and from their jobs every day, and the workers of the MTA make this possible. You are vital to ensuring we can keep these systems functioning and move essential workers throughout the city during this crisis. Now, more than ever, it is important to minimize unnecessary trips on our public transportation for the safety of everyone. I encourage anyone who can stay home and avoid using public transportation to please stay home. Staying home helps keep us all safe. As we navigate through this unprecedented situation, it is crucial that we work together, continue to support one another, and do our part so that we can stay safe and healthy. Once again, thank you to the hardworking men and women of the MTA. You keep us moving and are essential to our communities.
The next speaker is Senator Leroy Comrie.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to reach out. I know that we're going through difficult times. I really just wanted to thank all of the workers, the MTA workers and employees that are out here providing essential services every day. We cannot thank you enough, and we're asking the public not to overburden you by creating more problems and not observing social distancing rules. It's important that people that have to go to work be able to go to work in a safe environment and follow social distancing, do the things necessary to ensure that we do not spread this disease or re-spread this disease. Fortunately, the numbers are going down, but we must stay vigilant. But it's only through the work of the MTA workers, many of whom are residing throughout the city, and we've had over 50 deaths so far of MTA personnel who have been courageous in trying to provide our service, in trying to provide service to our community. So I cannot thank you enough. As chair of the New York State Senate Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions Committee, I have oversight of the MTA, and I know that the MTA is facing some major budgetary issues. I stand ready to work with you together to ask for more federal dollars to try to resolve these issues. And I hope that we take a hard look at what transit means in the future as well. I hope that we can do everything we can to ensure that whatever we need to do, we can be able to provide a robust transit system for the people that need it, and also be flexible enough to deal with whatever comes forward. But I mainly just wanted to thank the workers. Also wanted to thank the administration for taking the early steps to do a compensation package for those workers that have been lost to COVID-19. I think it's admirable, and it's a great first step as we try to work to address this. I just hope that we continue to protect those other folks that are still providing service every day by practicing safe social distancing. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Senator Tim Kennedy.
Hi, I'm New York State Senator Tim Kennedy. I'm the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the thousands of MTA employees who are working so hard each and every day, but especially now through this horrific pandemic. Their work is an inspiration to all of us and is nothing less than extraordinary and heroic. They're allowing the system to continue to function at a time where we need it the most, allowing for the essential workers to get to and from their places of employment, saving lives, and helping those that are suffering. It's also allowing the ridership to get the goods and services that they need to take care of themselves and their families and loved ones. Thank you for what you do every single day, but especially now. I also want to take this opportunity to honor the memory of the nearly 70 MTA employees who have lost their lives to COVID-19. Our hearts are with them. Our thoughts and prayers are with their grieving families. I want to thank the MTA leadership for working with the labor unions to provide for the $500,000 benefit for those grieving families. Thank you for that. I also want to call upon the federal government, the White House and Congress to step up. We need the federal government to provide relief for the MTA and other public transportation systems across this state and nation while they are providing an essential service to our communities. The federal government in the next relief package has to make the MTA whole, and we're calling on our partners in government to do just that. I want to once again thank the MTA employees for the work that you're doing every single day, especially through this very difficult time in our nation and world history. Thank you for what you're doing out there on the front lines. You epitomize what it means to be New York tough, and you are the strength and the backbone of New York. Thank you.
The next speaker is Assemblymember Amy Paulin.
Thank you. I have similar comments to the speakers that I've heard prior. I just wanted to also, as chair of the Assembly's Committee on Corporations and Commissions and Authorities, which oversees the MTA, I wanted to let you know that I've been closely following the impact of COVID-19 on our mass transit system. And I really wanted to take a moment this morning to thank the workers on the subways, buses, Metro North, LIRR. They're out there every day in the midst of this pandemic, making sure that healthcare workers and first responders can get to work. This dedication, however, has come at a great cost. I want to offer my heartfelt condolences to the friends and families of the 68 employees that we've lost. To the thousands of workers who are infected, I wish you a speedy recovery. I also want to let you know that I appreciate and understand the dire need for funding. No one knows better than I do and my colleagues in the legislature how hard we work to ensure that funding would be at a level that we need to make our transit system what it needs to be. So I am with you. I am working diligently alongside the board and the staff to ensure that Congress and the President lives up to our expectation to keep New York what it must be and make our transit workers safe and to make our transit workers work in the best transit system in the United States and the biggest. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Assemblymember Jeff Dinowitz.
I'm Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz, and I represent the Northwest Bronx. I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words to the MTA board, but I want to start by thanking everybody who's out there each and every day during this horrible time, whether it's people driving buses or the trains or working in the system, keeping it clean, keeping it disinfected, keeping it safe. While many of us are working from home, there are others who go out to work every single day, and I think it should be known that we all appreciate their efforts and will be forever grateful. But I also want to go on record as saying that it is so important for all of us to speak collectively to demand that the federal government step up and do what it needs to do to make sure the MTA, the largest mass transit system in the country, can continue to operate now and in the future. Billions and billions of dollars in revenue have been lost because of the virus, and 90% of the riders are not on the system right now. That's a huge loss in revenue, and it's not going to recover extremely soon. So we have to make sure that the federal government does what it should do, which is to provide funding for the MTA to make sure that our mass transit system can continue to be the #1 system in the country. Thank you.
The next speaker is Assemblymember Robert Carroll.
Good morning. I'm Assemblymember Robert Carroll, and I'm glad to be with all of you today. I wanted to make a comment and give my most heartfelt thanks to MTA employees throughout the region who have made it possible for frontline workers at hospitals, grocery stores, hardware stores, and all of those essential workers to be able to get to work safely and efficiently. I want to also give my condolences to the families of those MTA workers who passed away due to COVID-19. Finally, I would like to say to all the MTA board members that I look forward to working with you and my colleagues in the state legislature, in the federal government, the governor, the mayor, to make sure that we find the necessary funding to continue the 2020-2024 capital plan. This pandemic is tragic on so many fronts, but we will need to work together in the future to make sure that it doesn't undo all the great work that so many people have done in the last few years to make the MTA a much more reliable, efficient, and modern system. Again, my thanks to all the MTA workers, the bus drivers, the motormen, the conductors, and everyone else who's made it possible for essential workers to get to work safely and efficiently. Hopefully, we will be through this soon. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you. The next speaker is Anthony Simon.
Good morning, Board. My name is Anthony Simon. I'm the General Chairman of the Smart Transportation Division on the Long Island Railroad. First, I'd like to thank Chairman Foy and President Ang, the agency leaders and the staff who have conveyed their deepest appreciation for the heroic efforts of our employees, which is well deserved. Chairman, it is good to know that you came out of your own positive test well and hope the best for you. I want to convey Smart's deepest sympathies to all the families of the transit workers and other MTA workers who have lost their lives to this vicious virus. The death benefit agreement reached for these families and for the future families is an absolute no-brainer. I am sure the board will support this initiative as well as recognize the continued heroic efforts of the MTA workers who are still out there risking their own personal safety each and every day. They do not get to work or conference from home, so they can never receive too much praise. On behalf of the Smart Long Island Railroad workers, we remain committed to seeing this pandemic through. We remain committed to assisting this agency, providing the essential service needed and vamping up as we prepare to recover from this unprecedented disease. We are heavily engaged with the appropriate congressional and national figures we will rely on to produce the significant funding this agency will need to survive this financial burden. We ask this board and everyone listening not to ever forget that our workforce has done and continues to do each and every day. Do not ever forget the sacrifices they are making, as they too have families that need to be kept safe. If you think our workforce are heroes, which I have heard time and time again over the past month, and I absolutely agree, please remember them as heroes today, tomorrow, and into the future. They deserve a newfound respect moving forward, and this board can deliver it by future actions as we rebound from this pandemic. Let's remember, this pandemic is far from over. We will continue to do what we need to do to deliver. President Ang and Chairman Foy, communication is key. We have been communicating, and I appreciate the efforts you have made, and I will continue to communicate so that we can get through this pandemic. Thank you, Board. Thank you, Chairman Foy, and thank you, President Ang.
Next speaker is William DiCarlo.
Good morning, and thank you for asking me to speak about my experiences during this pandemic and how the MTA interacted with my union. I'm Bill DiCarlo, National Representative and Legislative Director for the Transportation Communications Union. The TCU represents many different crafts on several MTA agencies. First, I wish to express my condolences to all of the families of my fellow brothers and sisters of the MTA who had to endure the loss of their loved ones due to this pandemic. Chairman Foy, I also hope you recover completely and do so as fast as possible. I would be remiss in not mentioning the passing of Ray Kenny, who succumbed to the effects of this terrible virus. He started as a TCU member on Long Island Railroad and rose to acting president. After his retirement, he went over to New Jersey Transit to run the operation. Ray never forgot his union roots or the fact that it's the unions that really run the railroad. We all valued his insight and respect his ability to work with the unions to solve the hundreds of issues that arose over the years. We lost a giant. This brings me to why, when asked to speak about my experiences in dealing with the MTA during this pandemic, I agreed to do so. We all quickly realized that we had to think out of the box if we were going to protect our members and at the same time provide a level of service that is necessary to keep this city running. Both the MTA and the TCU knew it had to be done. We immediately worked together to create and sign all the necessary agreements to keep my members and your employees as safe as possible. Suffice to say, between all the properties, there were numerous agreements. If one good thing comes out of this terrible pandemic, it will be that it created an atmosphere of goodwill and a level of cooperation that we aren't used to see between union and management. The MTA had a desire to act quickly and make sure they did what they could do to minimize any conditions that would be harmful to our members while still performing the necessary work. It also has really brought to light the value of the union workforce that now, until now, wasn't truly recognized. There are a few things I hope for. One is a quick end to this pandemic through medical advances. Two, whoever is sick gets better, and a recognition that by the MTA that the unions are your partner, that you involve in your plans before they have been decided. This is especially important.
Summarize your remarks.
I am.
Thank
This
you.
is especially important if you want your vision for transformation of the MTA to be successful. There is one thing you can count on. If you involve the unions, then that is an honest evaluation of your plans and possibly alternative ideas that have been supported by everyone. Thank you for your time and allowing me to speak, and please stay safe.
Our next speaker will be Carlos Cesura.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos Cesura, President and CEO of the New York Building Congress. First off, let me say thank you to the employees of the MTA for their tireless dedication and service to the people of New York. We appreciate it, and we will always remember this as we move forward. As you know, we are living in very, very difficult times, and it is the position of the New York Building that significant investment in our 21st century infrastructure is very critical as we prepare the country for the challenges ahead. Obviously, investing in infrastructure is a proven way to create good-paying, great jobs, spurs economic growth, and historically, investment from the federal government in infrastructure has been a key to moving us forward, whether it was the New Deal or the industrial boom that followed World War II. The MTA, it is our opinion, has a track record of delivering critical infrastructure projects at a critical time. And this is the moment that the MTA must receive the resources, the tools to develop rapidly important projects and put our country back to work. There are billions of dollars worth of shovel-ready projects that need to be started, and it is our opinion that the federal government should fund the MTA as per the needs of the MTA, and that critical infrastructure projects of the MTA move forward immediately and continue during this time. Thank you.
The next speaker is Colin Wright.
Good morning, I'm Colin Wright with Transit Center. I also would like to acknowledge the devastating loss of 79 MTA employees over the past few weeks and commend transit workers for their incredible response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Transit Center and our allies recognize the urgent need for resources and equipment to enable the safe and reliable operation of MTA buses and subways, both during the COVID-19 disaster response and during the recovery. Our city, state, and national economies depend on a strong MTA. COVID-19 has decimated the MTA's finances, causing severe declines in fare, toll, and tax revenue, as well as increased operational costs. Transit Center estimates that over the next 12 months, the MTA will face an operating shortfall of $4.4 to $8 billion, even after funding from CARES Act is taken into account. Without emergency measures to fill this gap, the MTA cannot continue to provide travel for essential workers during the height of the pandemic, nor will the transit agency be able to return to the health and be able to return to health and power New York's recovery. We also commend the MTA for taking steps to shift service on buses and trains to lessen crowding, especially in the Bronx. However, we continue to hear reports from the field that current service provision is insufficient to allow for safe physical distancing on some lines, especially in the bus network. We urgently request that service continue to be redistributed to reduce crowding, especially on the bus network. Doing so will reduce risk for transit riders and bus operators, which is critically important for the Black and brown New Yorkers who are a disproportionate share of the city's essential workforce. Additionally, by releasing current route-by-route data on schedules and ridership, the agency will help riders make informed decisions about how to travel and help the public understand the rationale for redistributing service. Thank you again to the MTA workers heroically responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, who ensure that our city can survive these extraordinary times. Thank you.
The next speaker is Lisa Daglian.
Greetings. My name is Lisa Daglian. I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, TCAC. We hope that everyone is staying safe. We're glad to see that those of you who are ill are doing better. COVID-19 has been devastating to our region. More than 10,000 New Yorkers have lost their lives. That terrible toll includes more than 70 transit workers. We mourn their loss and extend our thanks and appreciation to the heroes who continue to make sure that people can get where they need to go. During the greatest health crisis of our time, the MTA has done its best to maintain its essential levels of service. It moves the New Yorkers who save lives and care for the sick, and all those who allow us to flatten the curve. Now, the MTA is in dire need of life-saving support, the kind that only the federal government can provide. Last week, the authorities sent a letter to New York's congressional delegation making an argument for more than $3.9 billion in emergency funding to keep the vital system operational through this year. We support that request, would even ask for more. We don't know the length or depth of this pandemic or how it will further ravage the agency's already precarious financial situation. The loss of revenue, combined with additional expenses, has put a serious hurt on the MTA's budget. Basically, the MTA is going broke to help save New York. It is critical that it emerge from this crisis able to serve riders and help support the region's economy and recovery. It's not just service that's in jeopardy. The future of the capital program depends largely on ensuring that there is enough money to run the system without having to reach into capital resources. The emergency funds the agency requested are an investment in the future health of the region and the millions of riders who rely on the MTA, and in the transit system that will ultimately allow us to get back in business and back to normal. We hope Congress is listening. Thank you.
The next speaker is Rachel Foss.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Foss. I'm the Senior Research Analyst for Reinvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for authorities like the MTA. First, we would like to acknowledge and express our appreciation for the essential work being undertaken by MTA workers. We honor those transit workers who have lost their lives and offer our condolences to their families, friends, and colleagues. The COVID-19 emergency has been challenging in many ways. We thank the MTA for continuing to solicit virtual public comment to try to uphold the spirit of past public comment portions of the board meetings. Reinvent Albany and many other advocacy groups joined the MTA in your call for an additional $3.9 billion in emergency rescue funds from the federal government. This is necessary because the CARES Act passed in March by Congress badly shortchanged MTA passengers who represent 40% of national ridership, but received only 15% of the $25 billion made available for transit systems nationally. The MTA's needs are massive, and New York's transit system needs billions more in unrestricted emergency aid from Congress. A recent transit center analysis found the MTA's continuing shortfall may run to $8 billion, even considering the $3.8 billion from the CARES Act. The effect of the pandemic on the region's economy is unprecedented. COVID-19 has caused a dual public health and economic crisis that will ravage the MTA's finances for months to come through severely depressed ridership, large hits to its taxes, and unplanned cleaning and overtime costs. Recovery of the region is dependent on billions in federal aid coming to the MTA, as the city and state will not be able to save the MTA. The emergency measures passed in the state budget, such as borrowing $10 billion in operating funds, should be an absolute last resort, as this would negatively affect the MTA's bond ratings, which saw yet another downgrade from Moody's last week. This in turn would hamper the region's economy, which is dependent on a fully functioning mass transit system like no other part of the country. This is why Reinvent Albany and our colleagues will do what we can to ensure Congress delivers billions of emergency aid for transit riders. We stand ready to work with the MTA towards this goal. Thank you.
The next speaker is Brian Frisch.
Thank you very much. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Brian Fritsch, and I'm the manager of advocacy campaigns for Regional Plan Association. I want to start by expressing our sincerest gratitude to the MTA for continuing to operate during the current crisis and to convey our deepest condolences to the MTA families for those that have passed away. The bravery and fortitude of many MTA workers who need to continue to work to get our essential workers to work and back home every day is incredibly appreciated. Public transportation is the backbone of our region's economy and is more important than ever to fund our public transit systems and keep them running during this crisis so our frontline workers can get to their jobs. To stop the spread of COVID-19, we needed people to stay home and off the system. This led to drastic declines in transit ridership and a stark financial picture for the MTA. Without reliable public transit, New York's economy will not continue to function during this crisis and will take much longer to recover when it has passed. That's why RPA is currently engaged in rallying support around the greater NYC region to support the MTA's push for additional federal funds to support the MTA's operating expenses as soon as possible. The MTA leadership recently made a clear ask to our congressional leadership, and it is incumbent on Congress to act now. In the CARES Act, the MTA only received 15% of the funding, despite carrying 40% of the nation's public transit riders. We demand that this inequity is rectified soon. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
The next speaker is Andrew Pollack.
Hello, everyone. Once again, thank you for letting me talk to you all during this unfortunate circumstance. I am Andrew Pollack. I am the public advisor to Passengers United. 3 points I want to make. Number one, I want to extend my condolences to Lionel Hogan's family and friends, Queens Village Bus Depot, HTU 1056, and TWU Local 106 as they are grieving the loss of their colleague due to COVID-19. Second, federal funding. I'm very glad that Chairman Foy keeps bringing this up. It's very important that the MTA receives the $4 billion. In the past 72 hours, I've reached out to both Senators Gillibrand and Schumer, along with a couple members of Congress, including Speaker Pelosi, to get the $4 billion that is needed once we can get everybody back into the workforce. And the third point I want to make, I reached out to Governor Cuomo over the weekend. Obviously, we do need an economic task force to rebound the economy once we can get everything back on track. I suggested to the governor that 3 MTA board members should be considered for an economic task force. Larry Schwartz, Bob Moran, and Robert Mujica have knowledge in financial matters, especially when it comes to transportation. So if the governor is listening, he should take my request and hopefully write it down for the record. So with that, thank you all very much, and I will be back in May.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes public comment.
Thank you, Kate. I want to note for the record that Commissioners Bob Lynn, Norman Brown, Robert Mujica, and Kevin Law have joined the meeting. Thank you for joining our virtual board meeting for the second month in a row. This is undoubtedly the toughest time in MTA history as we continue to navigate and manage through this unprecedented emergency. The most devastating blow of this crisis has been the loss of 83 of our brave colleagues, each of whom had a family, a history, and a future, and each of whom was tirelessly dedicated to serving the public. Everyone here at the MTA is mourning and grieving along with their families and friends. They will never be forgotten. They and the remainder of the MTA's 74,000 strong workforce are the heroes moving heroes of this pandemic. We'd like to begin today by recognizing and honoring those in the MTA family who we've lost to the coronavirus with a reading of their names. Sarah, please lead us in recognizing the 52 members of the New York City Transit family that we have lost.
Thank you. It is with great sorrow that we honor our colleagues who have passed away, and our thoughts, prayers, and any comfort we can offer is with their families, friends, and loved ones at this time. Juan Diaz, Martin O'Connell, Scott Eric Elijah, Darlissa Nesbitt, Daryl Sweeney, Frank Lee, Jacob Credell, Jose Lalu, Larister Brown, Peter Petrossi, Phyllis Robinson, Phyllis Holly, Randolph Christian, Steve Ribkin, Van Christmas, Ananda Mulia, Caridad Santiago, Ala Khalil, Avron Alvis, Ferdy German, Lev Galabov, Patrick Patois, Robert Saruda, Aristides Moratis, Peter Voigt, Clarence Facey, Hezrani Cayenne, Uriel Watts, Anstey Goddard, Kemraj Mahado, David Hamilton, Dmitry Bazovsky, Winston Pratt, Foster Moore, Palwinder Singh, Rhonda Garvin, Russell Jackson, Thankachan Mutahi, Victor Sapana, Yvette John, Thomas David, Salvatore Lombardo, Daryl Laborde, Edward Legenis, Shelley Johnson, Robert Mobiad, Emiliano Padilla, Saw Lee, Michael Thompson, Rodney Sparrow, and Milagros Perez.
Thank you, Sarah. Craig, please recognize the 30 members of New York City Transit MTA bus that we have lost.
Thank you, Chairman. It is with deep regret that I recognize these names in passing in our bus's family. Cornell Anderson, Felix Castillo, Henry Castro, Miguel Shumpitaz, Clyde Coburn, Stuart Cohen, Oliver Cyrus, Wayne Fingal, Joseph Fletcher, Erlin Galarza, Harold Germain, Gregory Graham, Hugo Gutierrez, Ramon Gutierrez, Ernesto Hernandez, Lionel Hogan, James Jackson, Emmanuel Jacob, Chong Lu, Leon McKnight, Julio Mejia, Hunsuraj Nankishore, John Phillip, Mohammed Rahman, Alex St. Fleur, William Scott, Cesar Torres, Sung Trong, Warren Tucker, Kenneth Wright.
Thank you, Craig. Kathy Rinaldi, please recognize our Metro North colleague who we have lost.
On behalf of the Metro North family, we'd like to recognize the loss of John Oles, And we would also like to offer our condolences to his wife, Karen, who is a Metro North employee.
I now ask all of you to please join us in a moment of silence as we reflect on the service and sacrifice of our fallen colleagues. We will work with family members and union leadership on an appropriate memorial when the pandemic subsides. We are all moved daily by our hardworking transportation employees who continue to show up every day demonstrating the best of New York. This city has been through tough times before, when the city nearly went broke during the 70s, and the Great Recession in 2008, and after 9/11 and Superstorm Sandy. In each of these cases, New York not only survived, but even thrived, and came back stronger and more resilient than before. I'm optimistic the same will be true after this pandemic, although it will take time, so long as our partners in Washington deliver for the state, the city, and the MTA. New York cannot get through this alone, and the MTA especially cannot get through this ongoing crisis without significant additional federal aid. In the meantime, the MTA is doing everything it can to adapt to this unprecedented situation. Safety is of the utmost importance as we forge ahead to keep the city moving, so the other essential workers like doctors and nurses and pharmacists and first responders, fellow transit workers, grocers, food delivery workers, and others can move around the city to do their jobs and save lives. The MTA is leading the nation in developing a proactive response to protect employees' and customers' health, from ensuring priority access to testing for symptomatic transportation workers with Northwell, to installing plexiglass barriers at back office work locations. The list of actions we've taken since March 1 is long and grows by the day. MTA Chief Safety Officer Pat Warren will give a more comprehensive update on these measures shortly. I want to thank Pat as well as Mario Pelican and all our agency presidents, Sarah Feinberg, Craig Cipriano, Kathy Rinaldi, Phil Eng, and Danny DiCrescenzo, for their steadfast leadership during this unprecedented and difficult time. I also want to acknowledge the rest of the senior leadership team for their continued hard work. I want to take a moment now to update you on some important gains we have made. We've seen more than 5,400 employees return to work at this time, and our numbers of quarantine workers are down to roughly 3,800 from a high of about 6,000. Let me talk about the family benefit. As I mentioned a moment ago, we've tragically lost 83 of our colleagues to this virus. As we grieve these heartbreaking losses, we want to make sure the families of these fallen heroes are cared for. Simply put, it's the right thing to do. Today, the board will be considering and voting on a first-in-the-nation COVID-19 family benefits program for our dedicated and heroic workforce to ensure that their families receive support and are taken care of. We've already come to 41 agreements with 26 different labor unions to honor the sacrifice and service of the fallen. We're in ongoing discussions with all our remaining labor partners to extend these benefits to all MTA represented employees, and the agreement covers non-represented employees as well. We appreciate the support of our labor partners to get this done for our frontline employees, including John Samuelson and Tony Utano of the TWU, Anthony Simon and the other Long Island Railroad labor leaders, and Matt Mitchell, Ed Valenti, and Bill DiCarlo at Metro North. I note that the idea started with discussions I had with John Samuelson. Now we'd like to see Congress follow suit by providing all essential workers, including MTA employees, with a form of federally funded hazard pay that recognizes how every frontline employee continues to show up every day, putting their fears aside in recognition of the public they serve. Let me talk briefly about the need for substantial additional federal aid. We not only need the federal government to step up and recognize the service and sacrifice of all frontline employees, but also to recognize the critical role the MTA and the transportation network plays for this region, and indeed the nation. It's been suggested that the transit system should have been shut down by now. But what's clear is that this would only have caused us more harm, as we now carry the doctors, nurses, police officers, firefighters, and other essential workers who are literally saving lives. When this ordeal ends, and it will, we will have proven the necessity of our system not just during robust times, but during times of crisis. What the MTA needs now is significant additional emergency aid from Washington in the amount of $3.9 billion. There is no time to wait. The present and future of the MTA are in serious jeopardy. The pandemic has driven ridership down precipitously, decimating fare and toll revenue. And the dedicated revenue sources that support our agency are also in free fall. These are extraordinary times that call for extraordinary measures. As such, we are again calling on Congress to deliver a national solution to a national crisis. We are grateful to the New York congressional delegation led by Senator Schumer and Chair Nita Lowey for the nearly $4 billion directed to our agency in the CARES Act. But continued ridership decline since the middle of March and falling amounts of dedicated revenues mean we need an additional $3.9 billion. Last week released the findings of a detailed economic study that was completed by McKinsey & Company with Jano Lieber. It estimates the full impact of the virus to be between $7 and $8.5 billion. Restoring the MTA's financial health is a matter of national interest. When this crisis is over, we will be there to power the recovery. We're the lifeblood of the New York economy, which accounts for approximately 10% of national GDP. But the state can't recover without a strong public transportation system. And this country can't recover without a strong New York. Our congressional delegation on a bipartisan basis supports this effort. The MTA was seeing major gains in service, in operations, in work on capital projects before the pandemic hit. And we don't want to go backward when the crisis ends. We need Congress to act now. I want to acknowledge, lastly, the support of our union partners in the first round of funding for the MTA. We are again working closely together with our union partners on the MTA's $3.9 billion request. Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to our Chief Safety Officer, Pat Warren, for a brief update on the actions we continue to take and to set the national example for ensuring the health and safety of our employees and customers in responding to the pandemic. Pat.
Thank you, Pat. Since day one, the health and safety of employees and customers has been our #1 priority. Last week, we announced a partnership with Northwell Health, Go Health Urgent Care Centers to ensure that symptomatic transportation workers receive priority access to COVID testing at 52 locations across our service region with no out-of-pocket cost. This expands the options available to our employees, giving them another avenue of support aside from their primary care physicians and healthcare providers. Let me highlight that testing of our employees by their private doctors also comes at no cost to them, thanks to a state directive on insurers. We have taken aggressive action to battle this virus since it arrived in New York, distributing over 3 million pairs of gloves and 1 million masks since March 1st. Further, we served as a leader in the transportation industry by providing masks to our employees well before the Centers of Disease Control eventually changed course to advise that all Americans wear masks. And on March 24th, we began to deploy a nation-leading temperature brigade to test tens of thousands of employees across the system, which was recently expanded to more than 55 locations system-wide. To promote social distancing, our subway and bus maintenance teams are working on rotations where reporting times, reporting locations, and break times are staggered. Personnel from key transit facilities have been redistributed throughout the system, including at towers and control centers, to ensure only service-critical staff are in location to improve our employees' abilities to sustain distancing standards. And employees in certain roles with high customer interaction have been reassigned. For example, wayfinders are now working in booths, and qualified platform controllers are working as conductors. The MTA has implemented rear door boarding on buses and eliminated cash transactions to limit person-to-person contact. And plexiglass barriers are being installed at 85 subway and bus work facilities locations to add another layer of separation protection. Our stations continue to be disinfected twice daily, and our full fleet of rolling stock disinfection occurring every 72 hours or less. Accessorized vehicles are disinfected daily. Additionally, we've established an on-call cleaning contract with Guardian to perform specialized cleaning. They have performed specialized cleaning at nearly 5 million square feet of workspaces and operating facilities so far. We will continue to do everything possible to keep our customers and employees safe.
Thank you, Pat. I now turn to Bob Foran, our Chief Financial Officer, for a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're in a financial crisis of unprecedented magnitude, facing potential fare, toll, and dedicated tax revenue losses of $7 to $8.5 billion in 2020 and continuing losses in 2021. We have sought and are slated to receive $3.9 billion in federal emergency aid under the CARES Act and have requested an additional $3.9 billion from Congress as the scope and duration of this crisis continues. The state has responded and provided us with temporary access to capital funding lockbox for operating relief through the end of 2021 and has authorized MTA to issue up to $10 billion in deficit financing bonds. Definite financing authority is something we do not want to use, but is an important tool to have available. Because of the impact of the pandemic, MTA's transportation revenue bonds have been downgraded by 3 rating agencies, S&P, Fitch, and Moody's, but yet remain an A investment grade credit. The April 2020 Budget Watch is in the exhibit section of the Finance Committee book on Director's Desk and includes results of operations for March and subsidies through April. The initial impact of social distancing and the governor's pause executive order effective March 22nd, limiting non-essential activities, resulted in a severe decline in all revenues, including ridership and bridge and tunnel crossings. Passenger and toll revenues were down $249 million for the month of March, wiping out February year-to-date favorable results of $11 million. Year-to-date March operating expenses were down $136 million, primarily reflecting timing impacts across all agencies. Electric power and fuel variances were favorable, reflecting both lower rates and consumption as MTA's operating agencies enacted essential service plans to meet reduced service demands. Paratransit demand has also been significantly reduced. Overall demand for service has been drastically lower as New Yorkers have heeded the governor's call for non-essential workers to stay home. However, higher costs for sanitizing will have a more significant impact on our financings in the coming month, and we will report these each month to the board. I would like to comment on how our administrative staff had risen to the challenge and kept our critical back office operations running while working remotely. At the Business Service Center, nearly 100% of employees, represented and non-represented, have been working from home. The call center is taking calls remotely and has provided supplemental support to the MTA Employee COVID-19 hotline. The Document Management Center is up to date with imaging paper documents for processing. Bills are getting paid. Payroll has not missed a beat, while Human Resources and Benefit Administrations are handling all urgent requests on a same-day basis. Procurement is conducting the full range of services it performs for the MTA family. Business Service Finance met the 5-day general ledger close for the month of March. This is unprecedented even during normal times. Many other examples exist throughout the MTA. This is a credit to our employees who are dedicated to public service. We have approximately $3.4 billion of liquidity and are soliciting additional lines of credit from commercial banks, which are receiving positive indication of interest. I receive our cash report early every workday, and I'm reviewing and improving all significant capital and operating automated clearinghouse payments before they're made. This is an unprecedented financial situation, but I'm encouraged encouraged by the support from the investment community and our governmental funding partners. Together, I believe we are prepared to deal with this crisis and ensure that the MTA will continue to move New York now and after the coronavirus crisis ends. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'd also add a brief note that while transformation remains on pause for the duration of this crisis, as we focus on running daily operations safely during the pandemic, Anthony McCord and his team continue to support the agency's overall mission. For example, they have refocused and allocated staff to supporting COVID response, and I thank Anthony and his team for that. Now, Jano Lieber with a report on MTA, C&D, and CPOC. Jano.
Good morning, Board. Good morning, Chairman. First of all, on behalf of the entire construction team, I want to express our admiration for the service of our brothers and sisters in the operating railroads and in New York City Transit. We have been able to continue the construction progress only because they have made it possible for essential workers like infrastructure construction workers to get there on a daily basis. I'm going to show you a PowerPoint deck, which I hope is now up on the screen. Andrea? Okay. This is an update on the progress of construction during the COVID crisis. First of all, we started telecommuting very quickly the week of March 9th. So the entire C&D workforce went to telecommuting by the week of March 16th. And I think that has had a positive impact on our relatively low infection rate. We've had only 9 positive cases reported out of a workforce in excess of 700. Next slide. Next slide. One of the first things we did was to create an app so that we can manage all the projects remotely. Actually, prior slide, Andrea? Okay. An app so that all the projects could be managed remotely. And that we had with that. We now have in excess of 500 projects reporting virtually daily on their status. Among those, we've had only at the low point, at the most challenging point of the COVID crisis, we had roughly 50 projects that were partly or completely shut down due to manpower issues or other COVID-related impacts. Today, we have 24 projects, so you can see that we're coming back up to the full strength. The app has been effective because it's allowed us to identify and resolve issues quickly where we needed PPE, for example, on projects, where there were supply chain problems that we could address, and also to regularly disseminate the mandatory protocols with respect to safety and all the guidance that was coming from our leadership and from the state leadership. It's been a key tool in our effectiveness during this entire period. Next slide. Next slide, please. So obviously, safety has been the #1 priority, even as we were deemed to be essential transit infrastructure and therefore permitted to keep working. We had to implement aggressive safety protocols. And we completely changed work on many, many construction projects in order to accomplish social distancing, to make sure that crews operated at social distance within a crew, equally important that they didn't interact physically with other crews, that tools were properly disinfected, that people who had to work in confined spaces like pump rooms or common rooms or electrical rooms, that we metered access to those rooms, that we also made sure that entry and exiting, that people kept social distance. And you see in the image on the screen some of those activities going on. You have on the left the disinfection of workspaces. We, as Pat Warren said, we disinfected a ton of spaces once there were any identified positive cases. We have in the center a toolbox talk before the start of work on the 33rd Street Penn Station East End Gateway project taking place with workers complying with social distancing. On the right, you see one of our construction projects doing temperature checking. So all of that kind of work was aggressively implemented. Next slide. One of the other things we did is we pushed out very early on, I think, a very effective series of flow charts that enabled contractors to correctly manage all the different scenarios. When there was a worker on a site who subsequently was identified to be a positive COVID case, how to deal with exposures in the workplace, how to deal with different scenarios where maybe somebody had a spouse at home who had tested positive. We created these flow charts, we pushed them out, and it enabled the contractors to really manage the risk to the workers on the project properly and in compliance with the medical advice we were getting from the New York State Department of Health and the MTA's own OHS, Office of Health Safety. Next. We also pushed out for all of the projects to comply with a daily safety checklist, which could be filled out as the photograph indicates by hand, but also could be filled out on a handheld electronically. And that is a reminder and enforcement mechanism for all of those rules about PPE, social distancing, and the maintenance of safe work practices. Next. We created a hotline just for contractors and consultants called with their COVID-19 reports about incidents and the identification of COVID positives in their workforce and how they were managing using those flowcharts, and that was extremely effective. The hotline, which as I said, operates 24/7, identified among a workforce that was about 5,500 people, indicated that we had only about 100 positive COVID-19. All of this is self-reported and unconfirmed, but it indicates a pretty positive level of limiting the spread within the workforce. I do have to acknowledge that one of our CCMs on a safety and security job we were working on for some time in Staten Island, we did lose a consultant construction manager named Phil Pinto from Hill Engineering, who leaves a family and who we very much mourn the loss of. Next. We kept, there were a lot of different things we did to keep the workforce safe. As I said, we distributed a ton of supplies and PPE, hand sanitizer, and you see David Solomon, who all of you know, participating in those distribution efforts. The MTA team, under the leadership of Pat Warren and Chief Procurement Officer Kavesh, did an extraordinary job. But we did have a reduction in workforce availability, about 25% during the peak of the COVID crisis. But in the past days, we gained back about half of the personnel that we lost during that. And so we're operating at a pretty high level of staffing at this point. Next slide. A lot of the credit, I believe, goes to the partnership we developed and maintained with the contracting associations and the labor groups around the region, both within the city, obviously the GCA and the Building Congress and the BTEA and organized labor led by Gary LaBarbera at the BCTC, but also the equivalent sister organizations in Long Island and in Westchester and the northern suburbs. We've maintained constant communication with them, and they've helped us to push out information about worker safety and safe project management practices. Next. The result is that we have maintained progress on the majority of the capital program. You see some of the milestones that we've hit on the screen. We are continuing to be on track schedule-wise on the L train and some other major projects. I just want to emphasize that a lot of the work that we accomplished was due to innovation. We were doing inspections that we would normally do in person using GoPro cameras that a contractor would carry around as we could inspect work remotely. We're using video and Zoom to do factory acceptance tests that we would normally send an MTA person to a factory for a test of a piece of equipment or an electronic system, we're able to do that remotely. And most important, we have great aggressive management from our own team. For example, we did not want to burden the operating agencies because of their focus on maintaining service with the requirements of additional resources and flagging and so on. So we reorganized work during outages on the weekend to minimize flag requirements. We moved work trains from one yard to another to make sure that there would be enough people to staff and load a work train without creating additional burden on New York City Transit. That was key to our continued success. Next. As I said, just a couple other projects that have kept going. The Times Square Shuttle project is actually moving ahead of schedule because we've been able to close it down and have the number 7 line provide the connectivity that the shuttle might otherwise with the low ridership we have. We've continued on schedule on third track. We've continued on schedule with our work on many, many other projects. And of course, I don't want to, it's too early to celebrate because we've had serious supply chain problems that have inhibited progress in many projects and have lost some schedule. We have obviously a lot of contractor force majeure letters that we'll have to deal with, but we're working with contractors to mitigate delays. And, your Office of Construction Oversight, the independent engineer that you hear from monthly in the normal CPOC cycles, we'll be working with them to evaluate what these schedule impacts are and how do we get out from under them. And finally, I would say one of the important things that we did is in order to make sure that the industry could survive during this tremendously challenging period, we emphasized timely payments to our contractors. And so we've been able to actually maintain a payment volume and timing of payment that is as good as the last 4 or 5 months when we were going full steam ahead. And I want to especially acknowledge the contributions of the BSC, our own BSC, in making that possible, them working remotely, but processing all the contractor payments. Next. It's not all good news, obviously. We do not have the capital program that we had, we talked about for so many months in these board meetings. The award of new contracts is temporarily suspended for at least 60 days. And the $13 billion I outlined to you over the last few months that we intend to do in 2020 obviously is, for the moment, at a standstill. Next. Some of the projects that we all worked so hard to set in motion are on hold. The 23 station ADA accessibility project that we kicked off the year with so aggressively dealing with that particular issue. Rutgers Tunnel, which we wanted to get done before, so that the 8th Avenue signaling work could get done. It's on hold. All the work on the Flushing line, especially at stations and structure, has been held up by this. But I believe that we have also put ourselves in a position to kick off that work and accelerate it if and when the federal government deals appropriately with the MTA's request for operating budget relief, and also, as they should and that people have talked about, start to put on the table meaningful stimulus program. We're going to put ourselves in a position to really get going if and when those positive outcomes are achieved. Next. I want to recognize, in addition to the operating agencies, I want to recognize the people at MTA Construction and Development who've been working remotely. As I said, more than 90% of them. They've been very, very productive. And I believe that this strangely and counterintuitively, this period of being forced to work together under these difficult remote circumstances allowed us to build a lot of cohesiveness and positive team spirit in the new MTA Construction and Development organization, which, as you know, it brings together the construction groups from each of the operating agencies around the MTA. Next. a big part of that success we've been really, I think, pretty aggressive in communicating, sending out 3 regular newsletters a week remotely, and having, I can't tell you how much electronic and telephone communication there is. Everybody feels very involved and connected, and with the use of these new technologies as well as more traditional means of communication, I think we have really, as I said, built a lot of cohesiveness that we can roll into what we hope will be a more aggressive program in days to come. Thank you for your attention.
Jano, thank you. Good report. Any questions for Jano?
I have one.
Yes, Andrew.
So, Jano, the Rutgers tube work was scheduled so that other things could happen. Does this mean, with that being delayed, that CBTC 8th Avenue installation is also delayed?
Commissioner, everything is on hold now. We are in a position where Bob Thoren really should speak to it. We need to have clarity on where we are operating budget-wise before we can start to make the kind of capital program expenditures that were contemplated in the 20 to 24 program that you adopted into the legislation that approved it. So all of that work is somewhat on hold. There are some limited exceptions, basically our in-house capital construction work. Obviously, we have those forces and we're paying them for their work and their time. But other than that, and maybe a little bit of using or losing money from the federal government, we are really at a standstill in terms of making new commitments. All of the good news I was conveying really has to do with projects you authorized in the past. Going forward, projects have to wait for some solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jano.
All right, good. Thank you, Jano. The minutes of the March board meeting have been distributed to all members of the board. Are there any corrections or admissions? If not, I'll make a motion to approve them.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Larry. All in favor? Minutes are approved. Thank you. Let's go to the family benefit action item. The COVID-19 Family Benefits Agreement. As I said earlier, it's imperative that we take care of the families of heroic transportation workers who lost their lives due to COVID-19. Families have suffered a tragic loss, and the sacrifice of their loved ones deserves to be recognized. These benefits include a payment of $500,000 from the MTA to the surviving family of any worker who lost his or her life due to COVID-19. They also provide health insurance to the worker's spouse, or if there is no surviving spouse, dependents to the age of 26 in either case for 3 years. We've come to 41 agreements with 26 different unions on this issue. The agreement extends to non-represented workers as well. We're working with all our labor partners to extend these benefits to all the MTA's represented employees. At this time, I move to vote on the adoption of the COVID-19 Family Benefits Program and all other actions presented in the board materials. Can I have a motion to adopt and approve the agreements reached with various MTA unions for the family benefit?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. I think this is an important action by the board. I'm now going to turn to Kathy Rinaldi for a brief report on Metro North.
Thank you, Chairman. Metro North continues to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and move our employees and employees of the other MTA agencies, medical providers, police officers, firefighters, grocery store workers, pharmacists, and essential construction workers, all of whom play a critical role during this unprecedented emergency. On Friday, March 27th, we began operating a reduced schedule on the Hudson, Harlem, and New Haven lines while continuing to monitor conditions in the field. With the reduced service, trains were far from crowded, as we continue to estimate that ridership is down approximately 95%. COVID-19 has also had an impact upon the availability of our own train and engine crews. Subsequently, we made further adjustments to our schedule effective last Monday, April 13th, and began operating all-day hourly service. Our normal weekday capacity has been reduced by approximately 60% when compared to a normal weekday. The reduced schedule runs 328 trains, which is down from 713 trains during a normal weekday schedule. We continue to monitor conditions in the field to make sure that our customers are still able to maintain social distancing, and we will layer additional trains into the schedule if conditions warrant. In addition, we have discontinued ferry service between Haverstraw and Ossining and Newburgh and Beacon and are providing substitute bus service. The Hudson Rail Link bus service at Spuyten Duyvil and Riverdale continues to operate. Overall, service delivery in the month of March was strong and above goal at 98.5%. In addition, all service periods operated above goal, and year-to-date through the end of March, we have operated 1.9% better than in 2019. For our west of Hudson service, the Port Jervis and Pascack Valley lines performed above goal at 95.7%. Let me try this again, 97.5% overall. During this difficult time, our top priority is keeping our customers and our employees safe, and we are taking all measures possible to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This is why we continue to disinfect our stations twice a day, sanitize our trains daily, and perform a complete cleaning of our trains every 72 hours. We are also cleaning and disinfecting our employee facilities, and we remain focused on making our working conditions as safe as possible. We have retained external contractors to assist in the facilities cleaning, but I do want to offer a shout out to our cleaning and custodial forces who have really stepped up for our facilities cleaning as well as our station and equipment cleaning. They've done an absolutely amazing job during this very difficult period. In addition, masks have been distributed to frontline workers and have been made available to all employees for social distancing purposes. I'm so proud of our frontline employees who come to work every day to answer an all-important call to duty by providing essential workers with transportation to all their vital workplaces. Many of our employees also continue to work behind the scenes, and they have shown true grit and dedication during this national emergency. They are focused on maintaining our trains and infrastructure, ensuring the safety and reliability of our system, and monitoring and adjusting our service during this challenging period while keeping our customers informed about service changes. Our employees are demonstrating amazing dedication to providing service during this time.
Room 216.
And the essential workers who are doing their part are perhaps the humblest and least likely to be heralded by the public for their exceptional service. I'm truly proud to be working with such a professional workforce. The entire team at Metro North continues to amaze me every day, and their dedication inspires me. My thanks to our employees for keeping the region moving and helping us make it through this difficult time. In closing, I also want to provide a brief update on positive train control. Metro North remains on target to fully implement PTC across our territory by December 31st, 2020. As I mentioned at last month's board meeting, PTC has been fully implemented across the entire Hudson and Harlem lines, as well as within the state of Connecticut on the Danbury and New Canaan branches. We now have 74.5% of our route miles in full PTC functionality. That's 182.2 route miles. And we're focused on the next segment that will come online between Woodlawn and Stamford on the New Haven line. Also, during the weekend of March 27th, we performed the last cut-in segment for the new signal system on the Port Jervis line. This new signal system is now fully operational on the Port Jervis line, and it provides the backbone for full PTC operations. We have a single procurement this month. It's a non-competitive procurement for approval in the not-to-exceed amount of $1.6 million. It's a contract modification to the existing miscellaneous service contract with the firm of Dayton T. Brown, Inc., for additional staffing to support PTC field work and to perform additional site visits. DTB's support to date has been a key factor in Metro North's adhering to its PTC implementation schedule, and their continued support is essential to efforts to achieve full compliance by the December 31st, 2020 federal deadline. I submit this procurement item to the board for its approval. May I have a vote for the MTA, for the Metro North April procurement item?
I move it, Kathy. Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The procurement carries. Phil, would you give us a report with respect to the Long Island Railroad, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My heart goes out to all who have been affected by this pandemic, and my deepest sympathies to all the families here at the MTA and across our communities that have lost loved ones to this deadly disease. And I ask that everyone keep the Kenny family in your thoughts and prayers as we mourn the loss of Ray Kenny, former acting Long Island Railroad president, who passed away from this deadly virus on Saturday. His love for the railroad community was unsurpassed, and in return, all its members loved him back. He will be deeply missed, but his contributions will be with us forever, not only at Long Island Railroad, but across the industry. These tragic losses only strengthen our determination to join together and fight the pandemic. I want our employees and our riders to remain assured that we are doing everything we can to keep them safe. Our teams are hard at work each day, aggressively disinfecting our stations, our fleet, and our employee facilities. And while we continue to run robust essential service plan, we realize that these are some of the most important trips we are making in Long Island Railroad's 185-year history. We're also making sure that these frontline workers who are helping to save lives in this crisis can get to work and back home safely and reliably. Over the last 2 years, we have worked aggressively to address infrastructure needs and improve operations so we can provide a growing ridership with more reliable commute. The Long Island Railroad has always been integral to Long Island, and we take our job seriously for every customer we serve. But as we sit here today, even with ridership down more than 95%, our service is more vital than ever. I couldn't be more proud of how Long Island Railroad workforce has risen to this challenge. Through all this uncertainty, we continue to run safe and reliable service. Since March 27th, we have been nonstop in delivering our essential service plan, carrying critical personnel across Long Island. We promised our riders that we would monitor the changes in the service and adjust accordingly. And in the first days of the service plan, we promptly added 6 a.m. peak and 6 p.m. peak trains, bringing our service levels to a 70% of a normal weekday schedule, totaling 531 trains each weekday and 516 trains on weekends. This level of service allows essential employees to practice social distancing while traveling on the railroad. We continue to monitor ridership travel patterns and remain prepared to make further modifications if necessary. The Long Island Railroad workforce continues to work tirelessly, helping New York flatten the curve and overcome this pandemic. And together with our colleagues across the MTA, they are truly heroes moving heroes. And it's important to note that we couldn't be doing what we're doing without the leadership and support from our labor partners. I echo what Anthony Simon said earlier during public comments. Our open lines of communication have enabled us to address employee needs in an urgent fashion and provide them with the information and tools to safely perform their jobs. To continue running this service plan now more than ever, critical infrastructure work is needed. The Railroad's department heads are finding new ways to ensure that our workforce can safely accomplish these key projects. This protects service both today and in the future when we begin to increase service levels to support a reimagined New York that reopens in a smart and disciplined manner. In March, we finished a variety of critical work on time and as planned, including platform repairs at St. Albans Station, the commissioning of new employee facility at the Mid-Suffolk Yard, continued support of the installation of the new substations in Freeport, and progress on Sandy rehab efforts in Long Beach. I particularly like to highlight the completion of City Good Repair concrete tire replacement work on the Ronkonkoma branch between Farmingdale and Ronkonkoma stations this past month. This work makes our stretch of Ronkonkoma branch even more reliable and safer than before. Additionally, our critical inspection and maintenance programs, such as the aggressive Sperry rail testing, which identifies hidden rail defects so we can proactively address them, avoiding potential issues, has proceeded without delay. It would be impossible to achieve this work without the diligence of my managers and members of our critical workforce, such as track, signal, power, and structure crews. We're not necessarily public-facing, but just as important in accomplishing our goals. We're all looking forward to the day when we get past this pandemic. It is imperative that we continue to deliver on key expansion projects as well, and we continue to work with MTA construction and development on both the mainline expansion and East Side Access projects. And with respect to positive train control, we have adjusted our deployment strategy to maintain our operations. The project remains on schedule to meet the deadline. Additionally, although our system integrator and their vendors are facing the same challenges as all of us through this pandemic, they have found ways to continue working safely. They remain committed and on target to hit the December 2020 deadline. And despite the pandemic, in March, we resubmitted our safety plan to the FRA on schedule as committed, and we continue to add sections into extended revenue service demonstration. Progress is also being made with Amtrak and the FRA to address Amtrak's proposed alternative solution and ensure their onboard back-to-back software is interoperable as their trains pass through Harold interlocking. There's more information in the book. You can also find the rest of our reports in the book, which includes our on-time performance for March, which was 95.3%. So currently, to date, we've had 236 employees test positive at Long Island Railroad for the virus. and we've had a total of 407 in quarantine. The silver lining is that 116 employees that had the virus have returned to work, and a total of 758 have returned in totality from the quarantine. And we're constantly thinking of them, our colleagues across the MTA, and all their families as we pray for their full recoveries. I want to once again reassure the public that the Long Island Railroad and our workforce are here for you. We remain committed to providing the necessary level of service that our essential riders depend on. And I want both them and our employees to know I will do everything in my power to ensure that we support them as they demonstrate courage and determination in this battle against an unprecedented and deadly virus. We're proud members of our community, and because of that, we take this personally as we work to protect our friends, our family, and our colleagues against COVID-19. We will get through this together. And for those of you who can stay home, I want to thank you for doing so. To all the essential workers, including our own workforce, to my managers and labor partners, I am proud to work with you as we support our workforce, both frontline employees and those working hard behind the scenes, from employees in HR, communications, safety, procurement, signal, power, track structures, legal departments, and many others, facing public-facing craft such as conductors, engineers, and station personnel. They're all coming together to make this happen every single day. You are heroes moving heroes. And lastly, for this month, we have one procurement that we're presenting with two separate parts for board approval. It's a non-competitive sole source procurement, and it entails exercising two separate options, both of which are original equipment manufacturer contracts for essential OEM replacement parts. One is on behalf of both Metro-North and Long Island Railroad for our shared M7 fleet with the Bombardier, and the other is for the LIRR's DEDM locomotive fleet with Progress Rail Locomotive. The Bombardier contract option is for $220 million over 5 years, and the Progress Rail Locomotive option is for $30 million over 2 years. I'd like to state that parts would only be paid for upon order and delivery, and only those parts that are necessary for service will be ordered. I would like to note that approval of this procurement also does not commit to the MTA to any minimum spending on this procurement, and only those necessary and prudent to ensure that Metro-North and Long Island Railroad have the ability to procure essential components and ensure that both our fleets can continue to run reliably and safely will be submitted. I hereby submit this procurement for board approval. Thank you, everyone.
Phil, thank you. I'll make the motion to approve this procurement. Do I have a second?
Second, Pat.
Thank you,
Can I ask
Kevin.
one question, please?
Yes, please.
So I noticed that it's Bombardier supplying parts for the M9s, which are Kawasaki equipment. That's not proprietary? Bombardier can do that?
This is for the M7, Andrew.
Right, but in the report, in the book, it also mentions and M9s.
There are certain components that are
Common.
consistent, that are stocked, and so it's components that are comparable being used. So
they're not proprietary then?
Not proprietary, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you. Procurement carries. Sarah?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the men and women of New York City Transit are heroes and first responders. I'm going to go through our priorities and then happy to take questions. Priority one is continuing to be the heroes who are moving the heroes. We are providing safe and reliable service for the essential workers who continue to get New York through this crisis. Since moving to our essential service plan a few weeks ago in order to respond to crew availability issues, service and reliability have steadily improved. Even with thousands of our workers still out with illness or quarantined, we are now hitting about, I just looked at the most recent numbers this morning, 95% of our essential service on any given weekday. And we've addressed sporadic crowding issues proactively by managing to increase service on the 2 line despite crew absences and adding bus service. We've also worked closely with the police to assist with crowding. Priority 2, doing everything we can to keep our workforce safe at this time. We are providing PPE, millions of gloves, hundreds of thousands of masks, thousands of gallons of hand sanitizer. These numbers have been repeated often, so I won't do it again here, but I'm proud that we've been the most aggressive transit agency in the country in acting quickly and decisively to protect our workforce. Being on the leading edge of this virus and crisis has been a massive challenge, as you know. And I think everyone at MTA in New York and in the country would agree. We wish the country had been better prepared for this in terms of PPE availability for manufacturers. But I'm grateful to the procurement team for the supplies they've been able to procure and for the teams who have efficiently moved it throughout the system to our workers, and particularly to the workforce for their patience as we've distributed it. There will always be challenges distributing anything to a workforce of tens of thousands of people who report to more than 1,000 reporting locations. But I have repeated to our workforce over and over again, if you show up for work and you do not have the PPE you need, raise your hand, tell your manager, tell your supervisor, email me, and we will make sure you get what you need. Each of us hears from a handful of people here and there, and in every case, PPE has either been readily available, which is almost always the case, or has been delivered or refreshed immediately, and I thank the team for being able to provide that. Priority 3 has been keeping the system safe and secure for our employees and our riders. There is no excuse but for our system to be as safe and secure as it can possibly be, and we have taken and will continue to take all necessary measures to ensure system safety. Mr. Chairman, I also want to address the incident that occurred, the crime that occurred at 110th Street on Friday, March 27th. On that day, a horrendous and allegedly intentionally set fire raced through the 110th Street station and Operator Garrett Goebel, conductor Rigoberto Mendez, and off-duty conductor Colin Baird evacuated passengers safely. Operator Goebel, attempting to escape the fire and the resulting heavy smoke, lost his life. Mr. Chairman, this incident has been devastating for the New York City Transit family. We wish comfort and peace for Garrett's wife, Delilah, his mother, Vicky, his 2 young sons, and everyone who loved him and cared for him. Mr. Chairman, I want to close by offering my heartfelt thanks to the workforce, the 51,000 men and women who continue to work on behalf of New York City and the public, and to their families, their spouses and children and parents who worry about them and who wait for them to come home each day. We are grateful to them as well, and we know that their sacrifices are very real and deep. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Danny, would you report on bridges and tunnels, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, my agency and I express our condolences to all of the families and fellow employees of those MTA employees who passed away due to this virus, as well as to all the people that have been affected. At Bridges and Tunnels, I'll start by recognizing the ongoing efforts of all the MTA Bridges and Tunnels employees, those out in the field keeping the public safe, and those employees who are working remotely. Both groups are ensuring the continuation of our core business during these challenging times. We are also working hard to keep all of our employees as safe and healthy as possible. We are quickly implementing our telecommuting plan for those employees who could work from home, and we did this in early March. For frontline employees, we're regularly cleaning and disinfecting facilities, vehicles, providing additional equipment and supplies, and promoting social distancing and proper hygiene, among other preventive measures. Again, I thank all the Bridge and Tunnel employees for helping to keep the region's essential personnel and goods safely moving while working to keep themselves, their families, their coworkers healthy. I will now move to procurements. B&T has 2 procurement items this month, primarily related to federally mandated implementation of split tolling at the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge. First, there is an amendment for toll system equipment testing, commissioning, and maintenance associated with split tolling at the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge, along with the catastrophic event mitigation system for all facilities in the amount of $17 million. Next, there is an amendment for infrastructure work associated with split tolling at the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge in the amount of $25.6 million. I submit these procurements to the board for their consideration and approval.
Thank you, Danny. I make a motion to approve these procurements. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Lacewell. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or noes? These 2 procurements carry. Next is the Finance Committee, and we'll hear from the MTA Chief Procurement Officer, Kavesh Iyer. Kavesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
MTA headquarters has one procurement action totaling $85,100,000. It is a competitive award to IBM to assess, design, and implement standardized cybersecurity controls across all operational MTA technology systems and to provide managed security services to augment the MTA Cybersecurity Operations Center. Additional details of the procurement are found in the board book on pages 48 and 49. Mr. Chairman, I submit this item for a vote.
Kavesh, thank you. Any questions for Kavesh? I will make a motion to approve the procurement. Do I have a second? Second, anybody?
Yes.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. The procurement carries. David Florio will introduce real estate items. Two.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real estate has two action items for consideration and approval, both for New York City Transit. The first is with Jamestown, owner of One Times Square, for the placement of elevator shafts within the Times Square shuttle platform area in support of the redevelopment of their building above and adjacent to the station. Bob Haley, Director of Transit Oriented Development, is on the line to answer any questions regarding this transaction. The second transaction is with the landlord National Resources to facilitate the placement of radio equipment and antenna on the roof of 29 Wells Street in Yonkers to enhance and support New York City Transit's bus radio systems. There are, in addition, Mr. Chairman, for information items, and I'm happy to answer any questions regarding any and all of the items.
Thank you, David.
David?
Any questions for David?
Yes, it's not a question, but there's also a couple of items in real estate referring to the Sheepshead Bay Station in Brooklyn, and it's referred to incorrectly as Sheepshead Bay Road Station, so you may want to change it to Sheepshead Bay.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else? I'll make a motion to approve the real estate items.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. All in favor? Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. The real estate items carry. And now I'm going to turn to Chief Security Officer Pat Warren.
Good morning. Thank you. As you're aware, safety statistics for each agency are in the board materials. The statistics report our status into March, which mostly reflect a pre-COVID environment. As we entered this pandemic period, our collective safety statistics for customer and employee injuries and accidents remained very low. I might add that the pandemic has spawned new safety and security challenges and risks that you should feel confident that the team, the safety and security team, are aggressively identifying and implementing some mitigation techniques to reduce those risks. Now, I'd like to include it in the safety committee book are New York City Transit's public transportation agency safety plans, along with the associated staff summaries for your approval. These plans were circulated in early March for your review and again in mid-April. As per 49 CFR Part 673, the 2020 plans require MTA board approval prior to being submitted to the New York State Public Transportation Safety Board. In short, the FTA requires operators of urban public transportation systems that receive federal funds to develop a safety plan that documents the processes and procedures that are in place to manage the agency safety program through the implementation of a safety management system, or SMS. Implementation of SMS is intended to improve public transportation safety by effectively and proactively managing safety risks through a comprehensive, collaborative approach to managing safety. I submit this to the board for approval.
Thank you, Pat. Any questions on this? If not, I'll make the motion to approve the safety plans. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. This item is approved. Unless there are any other questions or comments or other business, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. I move it. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. All in favor? The meeting is adjourned. The May board meeting will be held May 20. Thank you all. Today, a moment of silence for our 83 colleagues at the MTA who succumbed to the virus. Each of their names was read by the relevant agency president. We are mourning and grieving for each of them. This is one of the most challenging times ever for the MTA and its predecessors, New York City Transit, going back to the 40s and the 50s, and the subways at the turn of the century. Importantly, the board unanimously approved a $500,000 family benefit, which doesn't bring anyone's loved one back, but is a first-in-the-nation commitment to doing the right thing for our colleagues who have succumbed, moving heroes, first responders and essential workers around the city of New York and around the region. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
All right, we've got, just a note, Jano Lieber is joining us on Zoom and is available for capital questions should that be necessary. We're going to call on you so that we know who's talking. The first question today will be for Marcia Kramer, CBS. Marcia, you're up.
Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Marcia.
Okay, so I have questions. The first one has to do with congestion pricing. Will congestion pricing go through? What's the timetable? Is it something you need more than ever, or because of the crisis, you're not going to be able to do it? And my second question has to do with what you plan to do with the increasing problem of homeless on the subways.
Yeah, so on congestion pricing, Central Business District tolling, Marcia, from a project point of view, in terms of the things the MTA can control, we're moving forward with Central Business District tolling. It is on schedule from a project point of view. Despite the fact that we furnished US DOT with the information they had required in January of this year, we still do not have a decision on which environmental process they prefer, a long one or a short one. Frankly, we're indifferent. We just want to be told. We can't proceed on our own because the longer form environmental impact statement requires a ministerial action by the lead agency, in this case, US DOT, and we can't take that action ourselves. Obviously, volume on the MTA bridges and tunnels, and frankly every other bridge and tunnel in the region and the country, for that matter, is down significantly. And I will turn to my colleague Sarah Feinberg on the homeless question.
Okay, so I've commented on this before. You know, we are frustrated by the ongoing issue of a number of what feels like an increasing number of members of the homeless population in the system. You know, at any given moment, it makes for a experience on the system that is problematic for our ridership. And in this moment, it is not appropriate given the nature of the folks that we are carrying. So we are moving essential workers all day, every day, and into the night. And these are the folks who are on the front lines of fighting this virus. And so to the extent that we have individuals who are whose belongings are taking up space or who are laid out or sleeping, that impacts the space that essential workers have, and so that's a problem as well. We, you know, continue to work with the city and urge the city to take more aggressive steps to address this problem. It is without a doubt a city obligation and responsibility. The MTA continues to deal with it on our own, which we have been doing for many months. We continue to do so with our overnight shifts of MTA police and through a contract with the BRC to move people off the trains and offer services, shelters, safe haven beds, and hotel rooms. And we are continuing to look at what else we can do to move folks off of trains and make sure that there's room for essential workers. But
We stay in close contact with the NYPD and the city, but I think it's safe to say everyone here is losing patience with the situation.
Next question is from Steve Nesson, WNYC. Steve, you are up.
Hey, guys. Just a question. How much money has the MTA budgeted for the family benefit that was passed today? And how much do you expect it's going to cost, and how are you going to pay for that? And just to follow up, what is the plan for opening the L train tunnel, the completion of the work?
So why don't we start with the L train tunnel, and Jano, why don't you take that one?
Sure. We're moving forward with the L train project, and we've not lost any schedule. But as far as when we're ready to get it finished and let you know, we'll let you know as soon as that milestone has been reached.
Steve, with respect to the other question, the family benefits will be paid out of MTA funds involving no pension funds. We believe we clearly have the capability to make good on the family benefit that was unanimously approved by the board a year ago, and don't see any issue in making good on that commitment in full.
Next question is Dan Rivoli of New York One. Dan.
Hi, Pat.
Hi, Dan.
Oh, good. Coming in clear? Okay. Wanted to ask if you or your fellow MTA executives have given any thought to what the MTA is going to do when the inevitable restarting of the city returns and you start to see ridership trickling back up to that 60% mark of pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year.
When it gets to 50% of pre-pandemic...
Sorry. In your last availability, it was said that by the end of the year, the MTA anticipates about 60% of ridership back from pre-pandemic levels, so it won't be 100%. So, but my question is, what has the MTA given any thought to what it's going to do when the city inevitably restarts this year and ridership starts kind of coming back up from its rock bottom levels?
Yeah, so Dan, we have given it a great deal of thought. We've consulted with the public transit trade associations and agencies around the country and around the world to learn what they are doing. We are hard at work on a plan. Obviously, that'll be coordinated with the governor lifting on whatever phased basis he determines New York pause. And we are very focused on customers, employees, disinfecting, cleaning, and social distance on trains and buses. We will continue all the steps that Pat Warren, Chief Safety Officer, described at today's board meeting. We continue to add to that portfolio of customer and employee-driven health and safety issues, and we are, far into a plan for increasing service as New York pause is lifted.
All right, the next question is from Paul Berger of The Wall Street Journal. Paul.
Hi, Pat. How are you doing?
Good, Paul. How are you?
Good, thanks. My question is about the MTA seems to be emphasizing a lot about all the work it's doing to protect workers. And I noted that today, when Jano was talking about everything that his team were doing, one of the main pieces of evidence he used to show how well they protected workers was the small number of people who've been infected and the extremely low death count. So I was just wondering, in terms of the extremely high death count amongst New York City transit workers, do you think like that the data speaks for itself and that it shows that the MTA didn't do enough to protect its workers, especially in those early weeks?
No, I don't think so at all. Look, we are mourning and grieving the loss of every one of our colleagues who succumbed to the virus. New York is the epicenter of the pandemic. The transit workers who have passed away are, the data suggests, primarily male. Many of them have underlying medical conditions, which the public health officials tell us is an issue with respect to the ability to survive this. And the features put in place across the MTA, including construction and development, involve the same PPE, the same number of gloves, masks, et cetera, that we have distributed since the beginning of the pandemic on March 1st. No one knows in the public transit world how the virus was spread, under what conditions it was spread. As you know, I suffered from a mild case, luckily mild case. I have no idea as to how or when I came into contact with the virus. I have no idea as to whether I passed it along to anybody else. Just don't know. And epidemiologists and public health officials are going to have to figure this out as the pandemic continues and hopefully soon subsides.
Do you regret at all the fact that some subway and bus workers were told that they weren't allowed to wear masks, or that they weren't provided with masks when they asked for them again in those early weeks, given that they were a high-risk category?
Yeah, Paul, I regret that the CDC and the World Health Organization gave the advice that they did. And as you know, we changed our policies prior to the World Health Organization and the CDC changing. I do regret they gave that advice to the entire country.
Next question is from Dana Rubenstein of Politico. Dana.
Hi, Pat.
Dana.
I'm curious if you have any regrets about trusting health guidance from a federal government led by a president who's been very dismissive of the virus, and in light of the federal health authorities' own shoddy record on that front after 9/11, when Christine Todd Whitman advised everyone that the air was safe to breathe.
Well, look, the World Health Organization, international body, and CDC provided the same advice. The CDC is the branch of the federal government that deals with epidemics and pandemics. The World Health Organization is the international organization on these issues. I think everybody in the country regrets the failings of the CDC and the issues with respect to the World Health Organization. And I regret they gave the advice they did to the entire country.
And we go to David Meyer of The Post. David.
Mayor de Blasio has been talking about contact tracing this morning. And he said that, first of all, he said that it applies to people who've interacted in close contact for extended periods of time, over 15 minutes, less than 14 feet. But he said it doesn't apply to the subway for some reason. And I'm wondering to what extent, obviously there were issues.
Hey, David, David, do me a favor. Yeah. Start at the beginning. You've been patchy and in and out. I just didn't. I heard Mayor de Blasio and then lost the rest of it.
Of course. Just let me know if it's still that. Mayor de Blasio said that contact tracing wouldn't apply to the subway because it only applies to people who have been in close physical contact or face-to-face for over 15 minutes. I'm hoping you can respond to that and tell me, obviously the viral study aside, to what extent you all are concerned that the disease could spread in the subway if trains are too crowded?
Yeah, so David, I wasn't aware that the mayor made that comment. I don't have any context on it. I don't know what the point is, and I'm not going to comment on it as a result.
All right, we're going to move on to Alfonso Castillo of Newsday. Alfonso.
Hi, Pat. Good to see you about and looking healthy. Quick question. What is there, if anything, to be made of the fact that the Long Island Railroad is the only one of your public transportation agencies not to have lost any employees? And does it suggest that Long Island Railroad commuters, or as much as there are any commuters right now, people riding Long Island Railroad are safer than those on subways or buses?
Well, let me deal with the last part of your question. Safety is, in this context, God bless you, safety in this context is a function of individual human beings making the right decisions. Don't go outside without a mask or a scarf or a bandana. Maintain a social distance of 6 or more feet from others around you. Wash your hands. Do all the things that our mothers and public health officials advise us to do. So I think that is a fundamental and primary consideration here. Look, this is not a time for any agency, whether the MTA agencies in the United States or around the rest of the world, what to be celebrating in any way. And given the high levels of positive cases in both Nassau and Suffolk, which are dwarfed by the city, but still significant and growing numbers, I don't think we ought to draw any conclusions. And I think my advice to a Long Island Railroad rider, a Metro North rider, someone getting on the subways and buses is listen to what the public health officials are saying, maintain social distance, wear masks, scarves, bandana, wash your hands, and no one should assume that whether they're at home or in a grocery store or on public transit or in a personal vehicle or a for-hire vehicle, that they are safe or immune. Their safety and health will be enhanced if they take the steps that the public health officials described, some of which I just listed.
If I could have a quick follow-up. I heard today about some, and I don't know how widespread this is, sort of individual protests on Long Island Railroad trains, folks deliberately sitting near other riders, not wearing masks, and then when told by conductors, we need to spread out, kind of making a scene, bringing up the personal liberties. Are you hearing about incidents like this on the Long Island Railroad drive?
So, Alfonso, I have not heard that at all, period.
All right, we go on to the Times and Christina Goldbaum.
Hey, Pat. I want to follow up on looking at kind of renormalization. I know you said you've been looking at what other cities around the world are doing, to maintain social distancing on the public transit systems. But what a lot of cities have done are things, like photo enforcing, keeping 50% capacity on buses and taking people's temperatures as they get onto the subway to make sure they don't have a fever. Is that kind of stuff even possible in New York City on the transit system? And also, one other question, you said that it's kind of up to epidemiologists to look at whether the virus was spread through the subway system, but do you think it's also in part the responsibility of the MTA to look at whether its service could contribute to the spread of the virus?
Well, look, on who ought to determine how the virus spread on public transit in general in New York or California or Singapore, I think that's best left to public health officials and epidemiologists. I know the governor just announced a significant contribution grant by Mayor Bloomberg with Johns Hopkins on contact tracing. But I will leave that to medical and epidemiological and public health officials who are in a position who have the capacity and the expertise to handle it. Christina, I would answer the first part of your question in this way. We are looking intensively at what other agencies around the world and the country are doing. Obviously, to assure the public and our employees that it is safe to ride, there will be going forward a higher level of disinfecting required. We have been looking for weeks at some of these alternatives, some of which are quite promising. Obviously, the temperature brigade, which at this point has taken temperatures of about 35,000 more or less MTA workers, I think is incredibly helpful. I think that building on the work that was done in the temperature brigade with respect to disinfecting and some of the other steps that Pat Warren, the chief safety officer, described at the meeting today are, you can be assured, among the things that we are looking at going forward as the governor begins when he determines to lift New York pause.
But in terms of even like maintaining social distance between riders, making sure riders aren't sick when they get onto the subway, what possibilities exist to make sure people are taking?
Well, look, I think there are lots of possibilities. I think going back to the 1918 flu, one of the things that employers in the city of New York did was to stagger business hours. I think that's clearly something that is on the list. That's not an MTA. It's not something the MTA can mandate. But obviously, the governor and mayor could take steps along that way, and there is a history in New York of having done that with respect to the pandemic, a little over 100 years ago. If I have it right, I think that J.P. Morgan sent a communication, for instance, big important New York employer, sent a communication to its employees yesterday that as J.P. Morgan ramps up its in-office presence, obviously following the directive of the governor and other officials, governors around the country, but in the case of New York, Governor Cuomo suggested that they were looking at and would be putting in place a staggered workday. And I think that things like that, this is not just making the subways feel and be safe for customers and employees is not just a question, obviously, of MTA actions, although MTA is going to play an important role, but governmental officials making decisions and business leaders making decisions on staggering the workday, having people come in 3 days a week as opposed to 5, those types of steps will obviously help with the social density issue and with the 6 feet apart.
And now Dave Colon of Streets Blog. Dave, you're up.
Hey, Pat. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, party over here all the time. Kind of to follow up on what Christina was just talking about, there are reports, initial data out of China saying that people are switching over to private cars instead of trains and buses. There are people around the tri-state area who are saying that they like trains, but are kind of a little titchy about getting on them at this point. I mean, what is the MTA going to do besides tell people, hey, we're cleaning, we're doing our best? We all understand that, but what are they going to do to instill confidence in people that it is safe to get on the train, especially because you need people to get on the train to, get things back to normal?
Well, look, David, I've read those reports coming out of Wuhan as well. I think the first things that come to mind are customers have to act in accordance with the directives from the governor, from public health officials. So that means wear a mask. First, if you're at this point, if you're not an essential employee or a first responder, don't get on the subways, don't get on buses, stay home. If you're sick, don't get on a subway or a bus. That is good advice, frankly, at any time. Beyond that, we are looking at what agencies around the country have done, what worked from a public point of view in terms of disinfecting is going to have to be taken to a new level. And we understand we've got an obligation to help in the restoration of the New York and the regional economy to be able to convince our customers and employees that it is safe to get on a subway or bus. Part of that they're going to be responsible for, in terms of the mask, scarf, bandana, et cetera, and part of we will be responsible for, and we are in the process of putting together a leading, robust plan so that when New York pause begins to be lifted by the governor, that we're in a position to serve passengers, our customers, in a responsible, safe way and can make the same assurance to our employees.
And we turn to the Daily News and Clayton Gusa.
Hey, Pat, can you hear me?
Yes, Clayton.
I got a couple questions, so just I'd like to ask them individually, if that's okay. Starting off, going through the McKinsey analysis, it showed there were kind of laid out two models for ridership for the remainder of the year, both kind of peaking at 60% of pre-pandemic levels in September. In one model, it dips back down to 50% in the following 3 months. In the worst case model, it dips down to current levels. Are you guys operating under the assumption that even in the best case scenario, there is going to be a substantial second wave of the pandemic in the fall?
Clayton, no one knows the answer to that question. No one knows the answer to the question. What we are doing is preparing for possible scenarios. No one also knows how quick the recovery will be, when limitations on business and gatherings, et cetera, are lifted. And what we're doing is preparing. The McKinsey work was really helpful, and Jano worked with them closely on that paper. McKinsey work was extraordinarily important in making the case that the MTA needs an additional $3.9 billion of funding. And we will see in the weeks and months ahead what exactly ridership is. But to be clear, no one knows exactly what it is and when it will come back and how robustly, et cetera.
And then back to the workforce, a high percentage of the frontline transit workers at the MTA, particularly in transit, have underlying medical conditions. It's a mostly male workforce that skews older than some other frontline organizations in the city. Before the pandemic even came to New York, we knew that all those were risk factors for contracting or dying from COVID-19. At what point, or at any point, did you realize that your workforce may have been more vulnerable to this disease than the general population?
Well, look, people who are older, people who have medical issues are at risk to almost every, to flu, to not only epidemics and pandemics, but to general health issues. The workforce has performed heroically under the circumstances and is moving first responders and essential workers throughout this entire pandemic. It's extraordinary.
We move on to Michelle Kasky of Bloomberg. Michelle.
Hello, thank you. Pat, what worries you the most about MTA's finances? Is it being able to access the capital markets to raise more money? Is it what the MTA would have to do if it doesn't get more federal help? Is it getting more bank lines of credit? I mean, what's really the most pressing financial problem for the MTA right now?
Bob Foran, our CFO, described the challenge today as one of unprecedented magnitude. I'm going to ask Bob to step here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All of those are issues. We need liquidity so that we can move forward until we have the federal funds in hand. We need market access because we do have debt that's maturing. We have an operating budget that we're going to have to close because we do need to have a permanent solution. The permanent solution really is going to depend upon how quickly ridership recovers, how quickly the economy recovers. So I can't say that any one is more important than the other, but they're all happening at the same time. And so that really is bringing us kind of to the perfect storm financially. But I think we're prepared to address it. We do have the support of government. The federal government has come through, the state government has come through for us, and I believe that the bond market will come through as well.
I have a follow-up question, Bob, if I may.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. You know, in your disclosure documents to bondholders, you have talked about, you have mentioned potential restructuring of debt. Now, when you talk about restructuring, that means it could mean a lot of different things. It could mean just refinancing debt for some savings. It could mean pushing out maturities, elongating debt, or it could actually mean actual haircuts and asking bondholders to take less on principal payments. So what exactly do you mean by restructuring?
The first two. We can either do a refunding for savings, we could do a refunding to push principal out. If you've looked at our debt service, you realize that our debt service after about 2032 drops off significantly. So we have a lot of room to put maturities out there. We are not talking about haircuts. That is not what we're talking about.
All right, Bob, you may want to stay there because Bloomberg is tag teaming. We've got Courtney Rosen, also Bloomberg, different part, and Courtney is next up. Courtney? Well, perhaps Courtney is satisfied with the colleague, and we're going to move right on to Mark Hallam of AM New York. Mark, you're up.
Hey, Pat. I'm wondering if there's been any consideration to taking advantage of the FTA's COVID-19 emergency relief program. And I also want to know if you've reconsidered postponing any.
Sorry, Mark, go back to the beginning. I just didn't hear the question.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if there's been any consideration towards taking advantage of grants through the FTA's COVID-19 emergency relief fund. And then I've got another question.
So the answer is we've been briefed by the FTA. A number of people here have been briefed by the FTA on that program. We are going to apply to every applicable federal program that the MTA is eligible for.
Is that something you're hopeful to getting? You think the MTA will get it?
Well, look, I don't want that, which is an important program, to detract or to draw attention away from the $3.9 billion ask, which I ought to note is one that enjoys bipartisan support in the New York congressional delegation and newspaper endorsements from the Daily News, the New York Post, and Newsdays, different perspectives. But every available federal grant program the MTA is eligible for, with respect to the pandemic, we intend to access.
Okay. And my second question is, have you given any reconsideration towards postponing any facets of the Fast Forward plan? I know that you said that it wasn't on the table back in early March to postpone anything.
Yeah, sorry, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, give that to us again, if you would.
Yeah, has there been any reconsideration towards postponing anything in the current capital plan?
Ah, okay. Jano? Jano, do you want to speak to that one? Did you hear the question?
I did. Okay. There's no at this point, I think we've said a couple times, I think what we said pretty clearly a couple times is there's no decisions have been made about any permanent cancellation or delay of any particular element of the 2024 capital program. There is, however, a full-scale hold on advancing all projects and all new commitments until we see what comes out of Washington, how it affects our overall financial picture. That's the answer, Mark.
All right, we're going to move on now, or move back, really, to Courtney from Bloomberg, who's going to try again, has asked for another opportunity. Courtney, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. Is there a perfect situation for you to protect your workers right now? Perfect or ideal, or a situation on supplies and whatever it is you need to protect them, and how does that differ from what you have right now?
Look, I don't know that there's a perfect, I don't know there's a perfect solution. Let me ask Pat Warren to come up and talk about the steps that we've taken and the evolution in for instance, the temperature brigade.
Hi. So, as Pat Foy just said, there's no perfect solution out there. You know, in our daily lives, we go about our daily lives, you know, whether you go to the grocery store or whatnot, you've got to you've got to do smart stuff every day, and it goes to doing all the things that people recognize as good things to do, and that's good hygiene, that's wearing a mask when you can't sustain social distancing and the like. But for our own workers, we have not only reinforcing those conditions, but also, for example, we just talked about the temperature brigade. this is an opportunity, and we continue to expand it as we get more resources, to ensure that an employee that comes to work, if we identify them right off the bat as being ill with a fever, then we can send that person home so that they are get better because they're clearly ill, and that they don't have the opportunity to contaminate, at least at that moment, the rest of the workforce. So we are learning from not only what's going on in the rest of the world, but also what's going on here in New York City, so that we can apply these best practices as they are identified, and as resources are available to do just what you prescribed.
And a follow-up, if I may, has the funding that came from the federal government, the Federal Transit Administration, helped you on that at all?
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
Yes. Has the funding from the Federal Transit Administration, the money that came from the CARES Act, helped you reach that goal at all, of scanning temperatures or otherwise protecting your workers?
So let me answer that question. If you're referring to the $3.8 billion, the first piece, that money has been allocated to the MTA. The FTA has acted expeditiously. We have not yet received it. So the disinfecting effort and the other steps we've put in place are being paid for by the MTA. Obviously, when we receive that funds, it will help offset the decline in revenues from ridership declines, the declines in dedicated taxes, as well as the increase in operating costs in terms of responding to the pandemic.
All right, we're down to the last two. We're going to go back to Dana at Politico, and then we're going to close it the way we started with Marcia Kramer of CBS. Dana, you're first up.
Hi, thanks. Two quick questions, or what I hope are quick questions. First, does the 83-person death toll include suspected deaths or merely confirmed COVID deaths? And my second question is, what are you envisioning as far as the memorial to the fallen workers?
So Dana, with respect to the memorial, as I said at the board meeting, we will talk with the families and with union leaders on what's appropriate. It's too early to describe, what that might look like, where it would be located, et cetera. Those questions are premature, but we will talk with the families and with union leaders. And sorry, the first part of the question was what?
All right, the 83-person death count, does that include suspected COVID deaths or merely confirmed COVID deaths?
The answer is both. Both.
Okay.
All right, we're going to go to Marcia Kramer of CBS to wrap things up. Marcia.
Pat, I have some follow-up questions about congestion pricing. First of all, if you're waiting for the US DOT to do the environmental impact study, et cetera, will that delay the expected January 1st start of congestion pricing? And then the follow-up questions are, when will the Mobility Commission or committee be appointed, and how far along are you in your design, in developing a design for what the actual furniture will look like when you do the congestion pricing? Is all of that on track? Or
as I said, Marcia, the work that the MTA controls and is responsible for is on time. Point one. Point two is, just to be clear, the environmental impact statement is prepared by the MTA, in this case, Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. It's reviewed by the lead agency, US DOT. And we continue to wait for the DOT to determine what environmental process, the short one, environmental assessment, or the long one, a environmental impact statement. As I said before, we're largely indifferent. We just want to be told. I think, given a combination of the pandemic and the delays in Washington, a January 2021 start is unlikely. But we are doing everything we can on our side, on the MTA side, to advance it as much as possible.
All right,
And
thank
how
you,
much-
Pat. All right, Marcia, go ahead. You have a follow? Last one.
The law that was passed said that you expect to get $15 billion from congestion pricing. I wonder if you think that's reasonable, given the fact that there's been a drop in ridership, a drop in people taking bridges and tunnels, and will you have to re-estimate what you're going to get from congestion pricing? And the second part of that is,
So the answer, let me answer the first part. The first part is the answer to that's unknowable at this point.
and the second part is, do you think that given the fact that you have great operating needs, will you be able to take some of the money from congestion pricing and move it from capital, which is what it's supposed to be spent for now, into the operating budget for the first year, the second year, or however long you need it?
So that is a good question, and the governor's office and the state legislature, in their wisdom in the session that ended on April 1st, gave us that ability to use it for operations for a limited period of time. I think that's really important flexibility and something that we hope we don't have to use, but in terms of the toolkit that we have in dealing with this was an option that the state gave us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat, Bob, Sarah, and Pat Warren. And thanks, everybody out there. Appreciate it.